David, we got a question from one of our webinar participants, and it's similar to one I had as well. A number of us work with youth and adults, for that matter, who are neurodivergent. What does emotional intelligence look like for this community? Many neurodivergent folks tend to struggle with emotional regulation. I don't know how that ties into emotional intelligence. So I'm wondering if you've encountered this in your research and what your recommendations would be for folks who work with this particular subset of the population.
Thanks for the question. I don't have a great answer. And there's several reasons for that, but one is that that's a very broad term, right? Mm-hmm. And so what do we mean by that? I'll give you one example. For many years, parts of our objective emotional intelligence assessment has been embedded in a battery used by the National Institutes of Mental Health on detection of schizophrenia. Well, that's a heck of a lot different than some other things that we're talking about as well. Some of the research on autism spectrum disorders has been done on emotional intelligence, and specifically our work. And, those data vary a lot. Sometimes it's that initial mapping, that perceiving. And so everything else works okay, but not that initial accurate read. And if you're right, and if you start with the wrong input, everything else seems off a little bit.
Yeah.
And so again, I really don't have a good answer because it is a really broad term. But what I think, and I'm not really an optimist by nature, but I'm optimistic that if we can assess that the specific category, we know how to intervene, right? What do you mean by that? And maybe where is the issue? Is it that initial accuracy? If so, it's a hard skill. We can fix that. If it is on the move or regulation stuff, we can work on that. Those are strategies. It needs a lot of practice, of course, right? Some of these things are harder. If it's not getting people, right? So the understand the meaning piece, that's vocabulary. We can teach you that. We can give you a whole bunch of questions. Because if you adopt this idea that it's not you, these are hard skills. You can learn hard skills. And you can develop remedial or compensatory strategies. If I'm not reading you correctly, I can just say, as I did, how's it going? Why is that? I shouldn't just say, hey, how are you? You're going to say, fine, right? So we can teach people strategies to and maybe not to be, at the top, but we can bump you up just enough to make a really positive difference in your life. But I think it all comes down to being as specific as you can. Let's look at those skills. There's a lot of individual differences. And then by category, what are we talking about when we say neurodivergent? What research exists? And can we mess up? I worry about that. And I think about that a lot. I don't know if we could make things worse. Right? Depends how you introduce these concepts and how you teach them. But again, with some compassion and understanding, we're teaching a skill, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Yeah. But I don't think we would cause harm, and that's something I worry about.
I guess the only thing I can think of is if the person working with this community was not working on their own level of emotional intelligence, right? But was expressing frustration at someone with ADHD who struggles with procrastination, for example. Procrastination is not a great, I think you even mentioned procrastination in your presentation and how that is not great for emotional intelligence. But I feel like there's probably more going on for a neurodivergent person with procrastination than for one who is neurotypical.
Yeah, because you're also, you're imposing something. So let's say there's something else going on. I don't choose this, and then I feel that you're dumping on me, you're blaming me.
Yeah.
Which then requires me to have this high levels of emotion self-management, which I may not have. And so what me is that maybe youth ministers thinking, well, that was a minor thing, it just set him off. Well, actually, if you really thought about it, it wasn't a minor thing to that person.
Yeah.
And you're assuming that individual had this super high level of skill on emotion self-management. And that is just plain wrong.
Yeah.
Well, that drives me crazy. I get mad when I hear about those things, frankly. Right? Why would you do that? Please, first of all, use your own skill on this and recognize that if I'm pushing somebody whose emotion management skills aren't highly developed, it takes a lot less to set that person off.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. That's not right. Yeah. So it's not just compassion and decency. It's just being accurate about people and understanding how this works. Yep. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really salient. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I just said one last thing about that, which is just remind yourself, why do you do this work? Is it to bang people on the head with your truth, or just to make their lives better? Yeah. And if it is because you want to bang them over the head and tell them what's wrong, then it's time for a different calling, because that's not why we're supposed to do this.
Yeah, that's antithetical to our call. Absolutely.
So, yeah.